fucking mob, nigga. These niggas bleed different. We don't bleed, nigga. We make niggas bleed blood. Treyway, these niggas that heard me, I ain't heard you. Get the fuck up on my fucking face before I murder you. Bitch, niggas always take blood, but I know they fool. Whole squad full of fucking killers, I'm a killer too. Set shot, nigga. Everybody get pop, nigga. The nigga run, nigga. We set shot, nigga. 6 on this and 6 on that. Niggas on my dick and on my yacht. These niggas looking for me, you can hit my jack. I done drop my address, get on 6 on that. I'll drop you. Knock to his back like you drop up. Now that niggas don't top them. Smoke on the nigga who shot you. Drop them. Somebody call his fucking top.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
Hey, it's Jose Galison. You're watching No Way Jose. You can find me on the No Way Jose YouTube channel, all the major odd podcasts and Odyssey as well. That was a little edit on Twitter from my buddy Tim Tuttle. He puts those together sometime, and I steal them for intros. So why not? Why not use them? That was, as you can tell, 9/11 stuff. So we'll be talking about that today. I have Adam Fitzgerald on the show with me. We will be particularly talking about the Pentagon. For those who aren't aware, I have my $10 Patreon level allows you to do a curated episode, and my patron, Zach Overacker, he wanted to do one specifically targeting the Pentagon. I'm sure we'll be a little bit freewheeling as well. We'll probably talk about other stuff. But yeah, that's the main point we'll be talking on Pentagon and just whatever else comes up in conversation. Kind of probably, I'm assuming, roughly kind of the theories around it, and then obviously Adam's thoughts on what really happened. I know there's a lot of intrigue between the surveillance videos, the wreckage. There's all sorts of questions when it comes to the Pentagon. So we'll try our best to address those. I will go ahead and say ahead of time for those want to get irate one way or the other. I don't really have strong opinions on 9/11 stuff, so I'm just kind of listening to what Adam has to say. I don't know, maybe we'll push back here and there, but it's so like, if you want to get upset at anybody, I guess direct it at Adam. I don't know. Or at me. I don't care either way. You can be upset at me. But yeah, I don't know. I do have thoughts, but I just never really have gone too deep down the rabbit hole with 9/11. I guess maybe I'm just always spurring on something else. But either way, it'll be a fun discussion. Looking forward. I've been wanting to have Adam on the show for a while anyways. So this kind of gave me an excuse to. So I'm looking forward to it. I do want to remind you guys how this works out. I mentioned the patron thing. So the way this works is I have live streams for my patrons, and it goes out usually roughly a week or so later. Not all my content is live streamed behind the paywall. Sometimes I do public live streams. That's usually my Four Pony Boys, maybe some current events stuff occasionally, but it's pretty rare. It's mostly the Four Pony Boys. But if you want to have access to that early content, it's patreon.com/NoWayJose2020. Lowest level is $2. That gives you access to all the stuff I told you. And then you have 5, 10, 20. The other ones have differing perks, different levels, but the highest level being 20 is the sponsors. Sponsors are Mikkel Thorpe of the Expat Money Show. They also have Jeremy, who has an Etsy store, etsy.com/shop/raising liberty. You can follow him on Twitter at Jeremy Rhymes. And also Toad, who's my co-host on Tower Gang. Yeah, definitely go check out the Tower Gang show. You can also follow Toad at Tower Gang Toad. Also, Zach Overacker, as I mentioned earlier, he's he's above the $10 level. I don't know if that means he's entitled to 2 of these. I don't know. I haven't really figured that one out. But I mean, I'm open to it. So hit me up, Zach, if you have any other ideas. But you can follow him on Twitter at ZOVERACK, and then also Mike Degolish. Also want to remind you guys, TopLobsta.com. That's where you can get those Yiki shirts. See if I still have it over here. Yeah, I do. I try to keep it nearby so people can see it. If you want to get the Yiki shirt, get people asking questions, who the hell is Yiki? I just came off a Part of the Problem. It dropped on Sunday. And I'm not going to get this. Whatever, just dropped recently. I know this is going to get dropped later publicly for people to be confused with time. But either way, whenever you watch this, it'll already be out. So you can go check out his channel and see that. I think I did a decent job. I've got a lot of good feedback. Looking excited to see where that leads. And with that, let's go ahead and get Adam in here. Hey, what's up, man? Glad to have you here.
Hey, Jose, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, I've been looking for an excuse to have you on for a while. It just, there was always some other rabbit hole I was pursuing or something. There's so many different things. And I mean, I don't know, just 9/11 just for me, just and I'm not saying anyone's wrong for, going it, but I just kind of follow wherever my spurg leads. And
Mhm.
that's for some reason it hasn't been 9/11. I don't even, for example, foreign policy. I don't even know the last time I covered foreign policy stuff. And there was a period of my life where I was very well versed on foreign policy. I was super interested all the time. And I guess at a certain point you just like move on to another. It's like maybe it's like an ADD thing for like kind of like a spurg thing where I find another obsession. But I don't know, maybe at some point the obsession will swing around 9/11. I always get requests for 9/11 content. But I'm glad to have you here so we can dig into it a little bit. Maybe it'll
Mhm.
spark my spurg a little bit to want to dig into it some more. But
Well, it's a very expansive topic, and especially
yes.
if you have like attention deficit disorder or like a very short patience span, it'll be very challenging for you.
Well, that's the thing with when I meant said attention like ADD. That's like a common thing, a trope of ADD is that like ADD people will like get like obsessed on specific things, get to like a pretty good like skill level, and then move on to the next thing. Like it's like they get sucked into rabbit holes kind of deal. So it's like I guess technically that isn't really like you are still focused, but it's like on one thing. I don't know. It's a weird thing. I don't know if it's all ADD, but it's definitely a common trope. So that's what I was kind of getting at. So, I mean, right now my Spurg has been for a while OKC, and it seems to continue to be that way. And still keep digging into it and keep getting requests to talk about it. So I think I'll probably keep doing so. But
Mm.
yeah. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience a little bit, let them know who you are, what you're about. I already let people know, obviously, that like 9/11 is kind of like one of your things you're probably known for. But you also cover a lot of other content. Probably I'd say a lot of it's stuff that's kind of offshoots of like war on terror type stuff. I mean, you can correct me if you think it's a little bit wrong or you want to identify yourself a little bit as a more expansive role. But that's kind of how I view the topics you tend to cover. Let, let me know if that's correct or not.
Oh, no, you're pretty much right,
Yeah,
actually, right on the money. I
yeah,
am the co-host of the Darkened Hour, which is a geopolitical podcast. I've interviewed former intelligence officials, people who worked at the White House, and authors like Scott Horton, who you had on your show. And I do cover other areas. Like very few people know that one of my main areas of study is La Cosa Nostra and Jonestown. I barely ever talk about these issues because, like you said, 90% of my content is 9/11 related. But also, 9/11 expands into foreign policy, the understanding of how the intelligence agencies operate when it comes to international terrorism, Middle East culture. There's a lot to go, and
yeah.
so that's what I cover at. And also, I do tend to write some articles on Medium, and currently I'm working on an idea for a book. I'm working on that as well. But yeah, I'm mostly known for posting, 3,000 videos on YouTube, and yeah, the co-host of the Darkened Hour. I also have a WordPress actually, and in that WordPress, I basically upload just documents and files, and also books now for free. So it's all content. It's over 5,000 entries there. So everything I do is basically for the public to access and to gain information that they're probably not going to get anywhere else, unfortunately.
Yeah, I do want to correct the record quick. I don't think I've ever had Scott on somehow. I just, like I mentioned, I just never have gone down foreign policy.
You you
I'll
had
have him on it. I'll
you
have,
had everybody else on your show. You can't
I
believe you never
know.
have Scott.
Me either. Sometimes I think about it. I'm like, why have I not had Scott on? It's just like, I don't know. Just, I guess maybe I have a lot of friends who cover foreign policy. It's just not the niche that I really feel the compulsion to really cover. At least now, occasionally I'll touch on it here and there. I definitely am not a fan of war. War bad. Like it's just for some reason like the ins and outs of specific like foreign policy, how this country interacts with that country. It hasn't really been something that I've felt compelled to do. But at some point, I'm sure I will, depending on what comes up in the future. But just it hasn't got my goat lately. I've been considering maybe like getting him on to kind of talk about like because me and him have a common bond, I guess, in some sense with like the OKC stuff. So maybe I'll have him come on at some point for that. But yeah, no, I love Scott too. It's not even anything against Scott. I just haven't really like if you're going to have Scott on, you're talking foreign policy, and I mean, I don't. The way I usually do my show is it's like I just kind of whatever I feel interested in.
Mm. That's fine. That's fine. So you can talk about skateboard too. He knows, he skateboards.
Yeah, no, I love Scott. Scott's great. I think he's actually an absolute hero. Probably, after my whole stunt on Timcast with the Yiki shirt, like he put out a tweet with my picture, and the caption, the only thing was heroic. And like for me, that was, like I don't want to get people any ideas that I don't esteem, Scott. Like I think he is like a hero, but like so that legit was probably the best compliment in my opinion I've ever gotten. So like that can tell you like how I feel about Scott. Me not having him on my show doesn't say anything about what I think of him as a person and what he's
Yes.
done. Like he's definitely informed a lot of my opinions, particularly about foreign policy. And maybe in a certain sense, that's kind of why I'm bored by foreign policy, because like I have dug so deep down those, followed Scott Horton like crazy, that it's just like, all right. I mean, at a certain point, you like kind of get the rough dynamics, and now we're just getting to the weeds of like, all right, what latest skirmish is there, Like, so, I mean, once you kind of get the blueprint, you're like, okay, I got it. Like, it's not that complicated. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like libertarian theory, if I were going theory world. Once you like understand it and grasp it, it's kind of like, it's kind of easy to graft it onto other things, because you're like, it's kind of a simple, like, oh, that, I know a lot of people kind of condemn it for that, but that's kind of a similar idea, I think, to foreign policy, kind of what I'm driving at,
No, right. And you know what? Think about foreign policy analysts, especially the experts in the country, like Scott is. Scott is actually easy to talk to,
Mhm.
and he relates to the common man. And one thing about foreign policy is that it doesn't resonate a lot with the common people. So they have very ignorant views when it comes to foreign policy. And that's because they have very dry attitudes and a lot of dry personalities. Scott Horton is not a dry personality, not whatsoever. And so that's why
No.
a lot of people are drawn to him. And they would be too, because I consider him an expert. So.
Yeah, and especially once you understand the rich history behind Scott, how long he's been doing this, what actually kind of, like, if you look into like liberty history or anti-Fed or anti-war history, like Scott's kind of been in the mix for forever. So it really, he legit is kind of like, as corny as it may sound, like a hero for liberty or anti-Fed or anti-war or whatever label you want to put on him, So which is why I think, between foreign policy and OKC, those seem to be like kind of, it makes sense that he would have latched onto OKC, because that one is one that like it has a lot of implications once you start digging deep. But yeah, I guess with that, let's go ahead and get into the Pentagon. I don't know if I should start off with, I have Patreon questions. I guess we could probably start there. Maybe that'll kind of spark off conversation
Well,
from
let me
there.
ask you, are those
Yeah, go
questions
ahead.
Are they pertaining to the Pentagon?
Yes, pertaining to the
Well,
Pentagon.
why don't we do this? Why don't we talk about the Pentagon, then
Yeah,
have that for final?
yeah. I just figured most of these questions I was looking at, I'm like, oh, that's kind of probably
Or,
like the core of
whatever
it.
you feel, would that be
No, yeah. I mean, how about this? You lay down just a quick, for those who, I don't know, don't exist in this world. I guess we could do the customary, what the hell we're even talking about. Although I feel like it's almost this thing that doesn't need to be said, but I don't know. I feel like it's the formal, like how you talk about, like, here is what happened, and then we can move
Hmm.
into questions or talking.
So, I mean, the incident, first of all, the incident at the Pentagon is actually the most divisive uh, storyline of 9/11 in the 9/11 truth movement, even today. And this started back in 2002. And it was a French author, actually. His name was Thierry Masson. And he wrote a book called Le Pentgate. And actually, he was, when he wrote this book, he was not in the United States. So anyway, he got like three pictures, or he saw three pictures that he saw online, and he saw the damage to the second floor. And he actually said that that was the first floor. Meanwhile, what happened on the first floor was covered by this foam, this fire foam that's actually trying to put out the fire. It's like this thick foam and covered up the first floor. And so Thierry Masson used those pictures, said it was the first floor, and this would be the hole, and it would be a 16-foot hole. And he said, well, how can this be the plane? Because a plane, Boeing 767-200 or 222 series is basically approximately 126 feet wide. And so this damage can't fit with a plane. Meanwhile, a lot of people fell for it. And I think that book actually did well in the United States in 2002, 2006, 7. And it was actually used in films like Loose Change. Another film was In Plain Sight, produced by Dave Von Kleist. So what happened was, right off the bat, in the very early years of the 9/11 Truth Movement, you had this conspiracy, which started not just at Ground Zero, but also at the Pentagon. And by default, the Pentagon links with Shanksville. and that people started questioning, well, why didn't they find the plane? There's so lack in the plea. And when you look at it, you're like, wow, if you didn't realize that this was from 9/11, you would say, wow, a plane really crashed here, because you don't see large pieces of the plane at all. In fact, there's no tail, there's no wing, there's no engine. And at first, back in 2006, when I first started studying 9/11, I watched the film In Plain Sight. And then later on, Loose Change, I was like, they make pretty good points. If you don't know any better, you take it face value. But then when you start doing your homework and start playing the devil's advocate, and that's what you do for when you really investigate matters in any point in history, you start weighing the evidence, and all of a sudden, those points that you originally realized and thought were true start to fall apart. Now you make the tough decision whether you say, well, you know what, I was wrong, and now I need to make the correction, or you basically have any preconceived biases, or you just don't want to admit you're wrong, and you hang on to these theories that basically aren't untrue, and you can't explain them away, but you keep repeating them as if they were fact. And this is exactly what happened at the Pentagon. And so, what happened at the Pentagon? Well, American Airlines Flight 77 was hijacked at Dulles Airport, and it basically had a number of passengers on it. And I don't remember the exact number, but I want to say it was like around 83 people or something like that. And well, I'm sorry, no, it was about 60. It was about 60 people, including the crew. And what happened was it basically took off out of Dulles, and it basically was descending toward Arlington County, and actually was on a track. If you look at the National Transportation Safety Board radar data, it actually was about to fly over the Pentagon. And what it did was it made this long loop around the Virginia, and then came back and descended toward the Pentagon, and actually crashed into the Pentagon at 9:36 a.m. And when it did, it actually hit the Pentagon at over 510 miles an hour. And a Boeing airliner that was supposed to land in San Francisco airport actually holds about 36,000 gallons of fuel, which is about 78,000 pounds, approximately, pounds of fuel. And when it hit the Pentagon wall, it was called Wedge One. So in the Pentagon, they have 5 wedges into this building, like a pentagram, and basically it hit the wedge, the final wedge that was being renovated. And there was this project called the Pentagon Renovation Project, which was headed by Lee Evey at the time, and it started back in the mid 90s, only around 95, 96. And this goes back to the Oklahoma bombing story, because they wanted to outfit the building with bomb resistant windows. In fact, 60 Minutes did an expose just about that part of the project, because when the Oklahoma City bombing happened, a lot of the damages and a lot of the people that were found had shards of glass, because when they went outside to the windows in nearby buildings and in the building itself, the explosion was outward. And also, I think there was bombs inward as well, which caused a huge explosion outward. You could see like debris hitting like 2 blocks away, and doesn't fit well with the story about just the U-Haul truck. But we'll save that for Richard Boots's playlist. Anyway, when Flight 77 hit the Wedge One, it hit it at such a force that the back of the plane became the front of the plane in less than half a second. And so what happened was this caused an enormous explosion at such a high rate of speed and fully loaded with fuel that it basically decimated the plane. And so the explosion ensued on the first floor of the Pentagon. Now, the misconception about the Pentagon is that there's a wall, there's like 5 dividing walls, because there's 5 sections of the Pentagon. But that's not right. And if you look at the layout, which is readily available on Google Images, you can see the layout. The first floor is just no walls. The first floor is just empty. On the second floor, you have one wall. Third floor, then the fourth, and so on. And so what happened was the plane crashed right through the first floor, all the way out to A&E Drive, which is the driveway into the Pentagon in the inner court. And that's where it made that hole, that punch out hole where you can see the landing gear. And according to firemen from Arlington County and Fort Myer, they found even people's feet and shoes, and basically very little remains of human remains, and that would be, I mean, obvious because we're 90% liquid water and blood, and all this is basically going to evaporate with the ensuing explosion and the amount of force that is happening at that high rate of speed. You're basically being crushed into molecules at that point. So if you're being crushed into molecules, what do you think the plane is going to be? But they did manage to find plane debris. They did manage to find the uh, flight data recorder, but the cockpit voice recorder actually was so destroyed they couldn't get anything of value from it. But they also found landing gear. They found a part of the Boeing engine, and it was ripped to shreds. I mean, they found two parts of the turbofan belonging to the engines as well. So there was plane debris, but just not large pieces of it. And we have had, intentional plane crashes throughout history where there was an intentional plane crash where it left little plane debris. And just some examples, you had one that was the most famous one is the Pacific Airlines flight 1771, and that plane was actually going 700 miles an hour, almost the speed of sound. And the person David Burke actually shot the pilot, and he basically piloted the plane nose to the ground. And what investigators found, was that there was no large pieces of the plane. Fast forward to German wings 9595, which crashed into the Andes Mountains at 400 and I think 30 miles an hour, and they found no human bodies. There was no whole body. They did find human remains, but very few. They didn't find anything bigger than a part of the fuselage, which is the size of a small Volkswagen. And just recently, China East Airlines 5735, which happened just 3 years ago, and that was an intentional plane crash. And that plane, I think, was going 520 miles an hour, and they found no human remains. Just like in 1771, 9525, and China Airlines, Eastern Airlines. Same thing for Flight 77. They found no whole bodies. And I've interviewed the Pentagon Incident Commander, James Schwartz, who's an assistant fire chief at Arlington County. And he basically told me something I didn't realize at the time, was that they found a part of a woman's body, but and she was a passenger on the plane, but it was basically, torn to shreds and whatnot. But they basically, just about everybody on the plane was really reduced to small bits, and the plane itself was, destroyed to smithereens. And you're just going to find confetti-like structures, and it's going to happen when you have a plane that's intentionally crashing at a high rate of speed. Now, what I think the public discrepancy comes from is that early on the truth movement, they compared like unintentional plane crashes to intentional plane crashes and said, well, look, there's plane debris, and there would be. I mean, the pilot's trying to land the plane at a low rate of speed while dumping the fuel so it won't blow up. But that wasn't the case in 9/11. In fact, 9/11 was an unprecedented time because nowhere in history have we ever had 4 intentional plane crashes. So it really was an unprecedented time in history. And what this did was basically create a smokescreen of argument within the 9/11 truth movement, which is unfortunate because it still permeates the movement to this very day and has hindered it, and basically has caused a public backlash of sorts, and characterized the 9/11 truth movement as nothing more than fringe conspiracy theorists, when that isn't true. I mean, this is a small percentage of truthers that basically have hijacked the movement, if I could use that term loosely, and basically propagated these theories, whether to gain clicks or gain attention, or to buy their books and whatever they're selling at the time. But it's unfortunate because a lot of these people basically have destroyed the public perception of the 9/11 truth movement by propagating these theories.
Yeah, I think to some extent I think this phenomenon you're getting at, kind of with people jumping to, I guess, less credible theories. I think at its core, I think it mostly comes from a good place. I think the reasoning being, I think people just in their gut see this thing, this whole event, 9/11 in general, and they just feel like it's not what they're like. The official narrative's not right, and like I obviously have nothing against that type of thinking. Very rarely is the official narrative correct, and I'm not at all against the idea of, our own government perpetrating acts of terror against us. They've done it before. They may do it again. Hopefully, with this new information age, we can make it borderline impossible for them. But, it's not, I'm definitely not against the idea. Obviously, we can see the incentives, but I think you kind of got to keep a good head on your shoulders. And I guess this kind of leads me to the first question before we get into the Patreon stuff. I had something that just kind of came up. Like, I feel like in my head, there's like multiple levels of culpability for, like, say, if we're referring, because most people will be like kind of insinuating our own government or some other governments, had some involvement. Usually is kind of what the core of these is getting at usually. And I feel like there's multiple levels. You have like at the lowest level, like an oopsie, like, oops, we messed up. Like, say we were aware or we somehow screwed up in some way. But this level, I feel like that you don't also do a cover up of some sort. And then you have another level, it's like cover up. And that's where, like, whether you did it on purpose or someone else did it or whatever, for some reason you felt the need to cover up. It could be as simple as, I don't know, let's say, say with the Saudi Arabia angles, another Saudi Arabia angles in 9/11. Let's say, it was just because there was some untowards connections to certain politicians that we have strong connections with. Our government felt the need to do their part to cover it up so that they, didn't complicate public relations or, foreign relations or whatever. And even that's wrong. Like, that's not okay. So that, like, that's like another level of culpability. And there's a wide range of that. And then you also have like lie hop, and then you have my hop, which like let it happen or make it happen. Which those is like almost kind of hard to tell the difference between the two, because sometimes they look dang near the same. So I guess what I'm kind of trying to get at is like, it just what is your read on it? And obviously, I know this is a hard question because there's so many different levels, but just kind of loosely your read on it. And then maybe you can even give like your level of credibility to each level of culpability. Like, because even then, I know with me, say with like Oklahoma City, like, I can kind of give you my rough, what I think is the likelihood of everyone, like, oopsie, 100%. Like, you get to cover up 100%. I'm like, sure that happened. We get to lie hop. I'm like, it's still pretty likely. You get to my hop. I'm like, it's actually more likely than we'd like to think it is. There are things that imply it, although I will say that one's not a smoking gun. So, like, you kind of got to couch the way you frame it in that, like, hey, like, here's some information that seems to imply this, but let's be realistic with what kind of information this is. Look at the sources. There's also a pretty strong claim. So, and it's sitting on kind of not the strongest sources or only a couple spare documents. You kind of got to have a little bit of honesty there. Like, whenever I try to like present the MyHop angle of like, say, OKC, I am very much couching it in like, okay, but like, we don't need this. We can still hammer them on, cover up. Like, that's easy. Like, it's incredibly obvious there was a cover up, and at the very least, they also had an oopsie they were covering up, so. But yeah, I'll cede the floor to you before I keep rambling. I think you get the core of the question I'm asking.
I do, and it's an excellent question. Actually, it talks about the real cover-up involved, and the cover-up is not laying on the ground at the Pentagon. It's not inside the Pentagon. It's actually in the plane. In order to do that, to make sense to the viewer, I'll have to go back in time to make sense of it. If you'll give me a little bit of a chance to explain.
Go for it.
What I'm talking about is there's two individuals on that plane that were involved with the hijacking of Flight 77. This is actually the cover-up involving the CIA and the NSA and probably Saudi intelligence as well as Israeli intelligence. And that is Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. And for those who are saying, well, who are these two guys? Well, they're al-Qaeda operatives with a long history of being involved with the group that go back to even the early 90s. And this is coming from the intelligence agency's own admission, including the CIA, who knew about these two individuals. Well, let me give you a chronological order of things. Back in 1992, depending on who you talk to from the FBI or the NSA, they believed that the CIA and the NSA began monitoring bin Laden as early as 92. Could be even before that, I think. But let's go with just 92. The NSA were listening to the satellite phone calls of this individual. And what happened was the phone was being transferred to other people in Al Qaeda, Dr. Ayman al Zawahiri, Mohammed Atef, and Abu Ubaid al-Bashiri, and all these other individuals. So that they found out there was one number that kept calling it, and bin Laden kept calling it. And they found out that, hey, wait a minute, this number is really important. And this was found out in 1996. And so they located this number to a house in Yemen, in the capital, Sana'a. And what they realized was that this guy who owned the house, named Ahmed Al Hada, was an associate of bin Laden from the Soviet Afghan days. And who lived at this house? Well, Khalid al Midar. Khalid al Midar actually was married to the daughter of Ahmed Al Hada, Hoda Al Hada, that made him his son in law. And so over the years, the NSA started bugging this house from 1996 to 2002. That's 2001. That's 5 years prior to the September 11 events. And so what I'm trying to get at is, what do you think Al Qaeda was talking about on those phones? They're not like me and you. They're not talking about Kim Kardashian's ass and the Yankees or something like that, right? These are serious men. They're talking about operations. So I can't prove that, but according to Thomas Drake, the former senior executive of the NSA, that the NSA was the gold standard and gold mine of data that they collected so much information, signals, intelligence. That's phone calls, emails that they collected over the years on these two operations that they could have stopped 9/11 altogether if it was shared. And just them alone. I might talk about the CIA. So the CIA began doing human intelligence on the house. They noticed that these two men, Khalid al-Minar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, were, appearing at this house and whatnot. Then one day in 1999, December of 99, actually there was a phone call that the NSA heard, and it was coming from a person named Khalad. His name was Tawfiq bin Attash, who's a very big name in Al Qaeda in Yemen, and he was involved with the bombing of the USS Cole. And he basically told Khalid al Midar to come to a meeting in Malaysia. And so they did. And the CIA found out about it. And they told Malaysian authorities to go and take photographs of these people. And basically they did. So they collected a lot of information about these two guys and everybody who went to this meeting as well. And it's asserted that from the CIA that they were talking about 9/11 and the bombing of the USS Cole at this meeting. And so when they left, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi left, basically the CIA basically said they lost track of them. And why? Because they were coming to the United States. And on January 5th January 8th, January 15th of 2000, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi came to the United States, and they came with dual U.S. visas, known to the CIA, known to the NSA, and yet didn't share this information with who? The FBI and the State Department. Therefore, there was a cover up right off the bat. That's 1 year, 17 months prior to the attacks. And so they kept this information even while they were inside the United States and lied to the FBI. In fact, the FBI, one FBI agent I interviewed, Mark Rossini, who was working at the CIA's Bin Laden station, which is a virtual station involving the FBI, the NSA, collecting information about Al Qaeda all around the world, and saw this cable come in about Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. They came in the country and they said, all right, this is a Department of Justice matter. We need to start monitoring these people because we know they're Al Qaeda. CIA said, no, you're not going to share that information. And we'll let the FBI know because we think the next attack is overseas. And Mark Rossini is basically yelling at these people, one of them being Tom Wilshire, the deputy director of the Alex Station, Bin Laden Issue Unit, that was codenamed Alex Station. And he's telling them they're inside the United States. It's an FBI matter. And he said, well, it says CIA information and you're allowed to share it. And so they couldn't, by law, they could not unless they'd be arrested. And so they knew about these two men inside the United States. And slowly but surely, other 9/11 operatives came all throughout 2000 and 2001, all known to the NSA, all known to the Saudis, the Israelis, who were running their own intelligence, whether in conjunction with the CIA and the NSA. And so on September 11, 2001, Khalid al-Mihdhar, Nawaf al-Hazmi were seen on security video at Dulles entering the plane, going through security. They got their, they went through a secondary security gate and basically entered Flight 77. And therefore, without any knowledge from the FBI or State Department, that they were in the country. They were told too late in late August 2001, finally, by the CIA, but they still didn't tell them their full names and didn't tell them they had U.S. visas. This was kept from them until after the attacks happened, because in the afternoon hours of 9/11, when all the attacks happened, a CIA analyst was in Yemen talking with an FBI agent named Ali Soufan, who was actually interrogating an individual who was a liaison to Bin Laden, and he was handed a file, and the file had the photographs of Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, and he told that agent that these were the men involved with the hijacking of Flight 77 that hijacked the Pentagon. And Ali Soufan ran to the bathroom and threw up because Ali Soufan, just like every FBI agent in New York and Washington, D.C., knew about these two guys, but only knew them that they were abroad, had no idea they were in the country until after the attacks happened. And then when the congressional inquiries happened, 9/11 Commission, Joint House Inquiry, what happened? Well, they interviewed the director of CIA, George Tenet. They've interviewed the director of the counterterrorism for the CIA, Cofer Black. They interviewed Tom Wilshire, the deputy director of the Bin Laden Issue Station. All of the three of them basically told different stories about the mishandling of information from the FBI. In fact, George Tenet lied, committed perjury twice. I even made a podcast about that and told, I said, my God, how does nobody talk about this? He said that nobody read that cable at the CIA. Meanwhile, 55 agents from the CIA read that cable. So they knew about these two guys, knew about them, and then covered up the fact. Now, here's where conspiracy could run into play. Did they want this to happen? Did they make this happen by allowing them and then by hereby allowing these attacks to happen? Because, like I said, referring to the phone calls, what is the one thing about intelligence services? They collect information, whether it's signals, that's emails, phone calls, text messages, or human intelligence. That is basically watching a person under observation, taking photographs, and monitoring their whereabouts. And what happened here was that they may have collected information. Now, I don't know this for sure, it's speculation, so let's be careful here. I don't know what they were talking about in those phone calls, but if they would talk about the 9/11 operation involving planes, involving crashing them in specific targets, well, the NSA would know that. The CIA would know that. The Israelis and Saudis would know that because they're on the ground in the United States. But we don't have that information because the CIA and the NSA won't declassify it, and the Israelis and Saudi operatives were deported out of the country, so they can't be under investigation. So if they would talk about the operations, they can make preparations for these attacks to be successful. In other words, don't have NORAD interfere with these planes. Allow these people not to be investigated by the FBI. Allow them to come into the country unabated, even from Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia, where there's known hotspots for terrorism, because there's a Visa Express program in place, which was uh, uh, some say headed by at a shadow's length the CIA. So what you have here is allowing these people to conduct the attacks and then take advantage of the attacks. And I would probably give a good argument that's exactly what happened, because what happened after 9/11 is much worse than what happened on 9/11 itself. So that leads into your question about whether let it happen or made it happen. I can make an excellent case for let it happen. Made it happen? Well, they don't need to. Why would they need to? You already have an entity that basically hates the United States that wants to conduct attacks. All right, let them come in, let them do the attacks. Because if you want to say, and if you want to go into the fringe aspects of theory, if you want to say that there were no hijackers on these planes, that the planes were actually drones, or that the planes are holograms, and that whatever fringe conspiracy mindset you want to talk about these issues and planting plane debris on the site and human remains. Now, what you did was you created an avenue, a bigger vacuum of allowing the public sector to come into a very big conspiracy, and people that you need to monitor 24 hours a day for 22 years to make sure that the story goes along with the government narrative. That's a lot of people you're inviting. The FBI, FEMA, even local fire departments, police departments, first responders, all people who found like plane debris and human remains of passengers and artifacts like ID cards and whatnot. That's a lot of people you have to involve. It's much easier to allow these attacks just to transpire without interference from anybody and then take advantage of the fact and hide the real cover up. And that is that the intelligence services knew this was going to happen and didn't share this information for whatever reason. I think that's the plausible explanation.
Yeah, I think there when it comes to LIHOP and MIHOP, there's almost like a blurry line at which point
Correct.
one enters the other. I think some of the things you alluded to being a possibility would honestly be on the lower end of MIHOP. It seems you were implying there's a strong possibility that perhaps certain actors in positions of power may have made subtle little moves to make this easier to happen. And so when it comes to LIHOP or MIHOP, it's like really a matter of intentionality.
Mm,
It is to some extent, unless you're trying to say something like, I don't know, it was all drones or something. Okay, yeah, no, that's just like a resolute, solid MIHOP. Like, let's be
mm,
real, if
mm.
that's the case. But if you're on the other end where it's like, they are providing material support or doing things in the aims of this happening. Sometimes it becomes a position where they have plausible deniability to where it could still be in a lie hop situation as opposed to a my hop, because we're not mind readers. They can defend certain actions as, well, that wasn't because we were wanting this event to happen. This is because we had embedded ourselves in this group and we were gathering intel, and we didn't understand that it would go this far or whatever. It gives you this plausible deniability. So sounds like to me you are like pretty much resolutely you believe lie hop, but you're heavily suspicious of my hop, but you probably seem happy to say that, like, you're not happy, but that you would probably receipt that in a place of, but I can't prove that, aside from maybe a few suggestive things here and there. Does that
I
sound
think that
right?
pretty much sums up my way of thinking regarding. Like I said, I could probably make a really good argument for letting it happen, but making happen, yeah, that's pressing it.
Yeah, because it is the nature of the things, and this is kind of roughly, like I said, I'm not a huge 9/11, but I've gone down these rabbit holes before, and that kind of seemed to always be my impression that, like, some of the more fantastical, like, they completely perpetrated this. I mean, I don't necessarily throw some aspects of those theories out the window. I don't know. I'm a little open minded. I don't believe it. Like, I'm the kind of guy who likes to listen to crazy schizo podcasts about like conspiracies, that just wild stuff. But like, I feel like I have a decent, like, rational mind, into where I can go like, all right, well, that's bullshit. That's bullshit. I feel like personally myself, I find it's almost like a fun thought exercise listening to these people lay out certain like crazy conspiracies. And sometimes I do identify like, okay, well, he made a good point there. I don't know, maybe there's something there. But I'm like, okay, yeah, I don't think the aliens did it. But like,
Right, right.
you know what I mean? Like, you kind of take the good with the bad. It is also kind of fun to see the schizo mind at work and what kind of connections they make. And sometimes you can be like, oh no, all right, well, that's an interesting connection. Um, but yeah, I guess let's go ahead and get into the questions.
Please.
I think a lot of these will be maybe retreading it. Um, Zachary, does he actually believe it was a plane? Veteran pilots say they could not have flown the plane in that flight path, even with a nimble military plane. So how did this novice that got terrible reviews, basically couldn't fly functionally at flight school, fly at an impossible path?
I've heard this before. Actually, that started under Pilots for 9/11 Truth, which was headed by the late Rob Balsamo, who passed away just about 2 years ago. These were people who aren't actually commercial airline pilots, but Piper plane pilots and whatnot. I think you have one commercial pilot, but who says that everybody has to be rational? They actually don't believe that the hijackers are dead. Some of them are alive. So they're basically their way of thinking actually gets in the way of their rational cognitive thinking. What now? I don't know why they went down this route, but no reputable airline industry, including the AIU, AIA, which is the largest union in the United States, they don't have any problem that the United Airlines, American Airlines were hijacked. Um, I noticed that this claim that Alejandro was a terrible pilot, but he wasn't training to be a pilot. He was actually training how to take off, and that's all he needed to do was basically take off because he's not landing. Doesn't You don't need to be an expert to crash a plane. There was actually nothing that he did was actually that couldn't be done by an amateur. In fact, I should post the video. It's a short video I have in my own personal watch list of an amateur actually in a simulation machine actually crashed in the Pentagon twice using the radar data that was used on Flight 77. So it's not like this couldn't be replicated. But like I said, crashing a plane doesn't take an expert, and you don't need to be an expert to pilot a plane. Really, they trained on sim. In fact, Alejandro is the most experienced of them all because he actually trained to be a pilot as far back as the mid '90s. He actually went to the University of Arizona here in the United States in '92 to study electrical engineering, and he actually took a flight training school in Tucson in 1993, and he went back to Saudi Arabia because he wanted to be a pilot and trained there. So he trained a lot of airline. Now, like I said, he couldn't speak English very well. He couldn't land very well, and so he got these very low grades. And do I think he deserved his like commercial airlines ratings list? I couldn't tell you whether he should or not. Maybe not, because like I said, he's training to just basically take off and learn about the novice understanding of a plane. Like I said, none of these guys were trained to be pilots. They're trained to crash.
I mean, he didn't even know how to. He need to know how to take off because they took him off, took over the planes in flight. So, I mean, you're already in the air. If you're not planning on landing, that's the hardest part, taking off and landing. So, I don't.
And plus, this was Flight 77 was also on autopilot for most of the flight.
Mhm. Uh, so where the heck does that theory or the whole line of like that was an impossible flight? But like, is that like some people conflating that with professionals saying like basing that off of like flying in that way with the anticipation of landing or something? I because otherwise, I mean, I've never really like really dug into the veracity of that claim much, but like I don't know. The whole idea, I guess, is to be able to get down because I mean it's a pretty low building, sorta, to get like kind of come down and come in straight like that. I don't really know. I don't know if there were obstacles. I believe I remember vaguely something about obstacles you'd have to avoid. I don't know. Is there anything to that, or is it just like a claim that there is like some small grain of truth in the aspect of like I was saying, they conflated it with some other like thing where someone was basing it off of, I don't know, maybe some sort of academic aspect of like flying, where you're like, yeah, like on this flight path, you're clearly not going to make it or something like that. You know what I mean? Because like, yeah, like you said, you're not trying to land. So like, if you're basing this off of traditional, I know the academics of flying, like, yeah, this kind of
Right,
breaks
sure.
all the rules.
In the mid 2000s, like I said, Pilots for 9/11 Truth was a big organization at one point, prominent 9/11 Truth movement, and it was actually even supported by 9/11 advocates like David Ray Griffin and Jim Fetzer, and Loose Change actually relates much of Rob Balsama's work in the film. So the 9/11 Truth movement took them as gospel because Rob Balsamo was actually a pilot for passenger planes. I mean, his own personal planes. I think Colonel Wittenberg, Russ Wittenberg, co-founder of the site, he's actually a commercial airline pilot. But I mean, not everybody's going to be rational and sane. Now, I'm not saying these people are kooks and crazies and whatnot. They're just basically wrong. Now, there's various reasons as to why they're doing this. Whether they want to implicate the government that bad, they'll just facilitate something as erroneous as this, or they just got it wrong.
Well, they got
I
fed
can't go
money
there.
by the feds to say certain things.
Well, then that's another. I hate going down the road because I think that way with Alex Jones, and I hate that
Yeah.
guy. But he has such a big platform. But these guys are small timers. But yeah, I mean, I just think they're just wanting so desperate to blame the federal government that they'll just believe any theory that goes against this official narrative. And I think
Yeah.
that's the essence of this is that they've been told for so long that the official narrative is wrong. And from my experience, to them, the official narrative is that 4 planes were hijacked by 19 radical Islamics who hate our freedoms and crashed them into the World Trade Center, Pentagon, Shanksville, and that the World Trade Centers came down by pre-planted explosives. But if you just see 9/11 as that, you're missing 98% of the story because there's so much more to it. And if people just dismiss the 9/11 Commission or the Joint House inquiry, the two 9/11 inquiries that took place, and you don't read these reports and what is right and what is wrong, not everything they told is a lie, but not everything is told the truth. But most of the information is missing. And that is a testament to the agencies like the CIA, the NSA, the Israelis and Saudis who didn't share this information with anyone. And they classified this stuff. The reason why they classified, same thing with the Oklahoma City bombing. I mean, there's documents and files that, thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands, locked away for the next 40 years. Why? Because all the major players are involved in cover up are dead. And so they can't be held into account. I mean, take a look at JFK, for goodness sakes. And that was that 70 years now running. So you have this massive cover up involving 9/11, huge. I mean, so global. That involves a lot of players, and there's a lot of cover up going on. But if you basically don't uh, acknowledge that the simplistic and the obvious happened, well, then you're not going to delve into the intricacies and anomalies that took place on that day. Because if you don't believe in hijackers, well, there's no issue in studying about their backgrounds and how they intertwine with the intelligence services. And
Yeah.
so you won't care to go down that road. And so I think the 9/11 Truth Movement unfortunately went down that road many a time. So that's where that started about the planes and whoa, couldn't make that turn. The turn, by the way, which you could see on the radar data report, wasn't a very hard turn. It actually went on, I think it was going 230 miles an hour, the plane. It wasn't going very fast. And then when it descended into Arlington City, and basically he just put on the pedal and went straight down and basically hit the Pentagon. That was actually seen by over 100 people who were in the vicinity of the Pentagon.
Yeah, I do want to say for those, I guess maybe I mean, this will be, I don't know if I'll drop another episode between or not, but this might be the episode I drop right after part of the problem. So I'll probably get a good view, but I want to, so I'm probably getting a little bit of new audience here. I want to be very clear when I threw up the Fed thesis, I wasn't claiming that like everyone's a Fed or even that it's like there's a bunch of Feds or even that you should immediately jump to the thought of Fed. But I think people should keep in mind that the Fed/Fed informant/asset is a legitimate concern, especially in stuff like this. I mean, once you start digging into these rabbit holes and start getting a grasp on these like these deep parapolitics type stuff, like you understand. I mean, you just go on a few rabbit holes, whether it's JFK, OKC, even 9/11, or another good one to go down is like the Manson rabbit hole. Like go read Chaos, like. Or once you start, I mean, hell, even modern day Ye with his whole like Pasternak stuff with his doctor, like you start to get a grasp on the mechanisms of the deep state and to what extent they have infiltrated all different fields. So it only makes sense if you have a narrative that they would also be doing their best to try to control the counter narrative as well. So I'm not saying, I'm not accusing any of those individuals of being Feds, but I'm saying remain open to the possibility, and I would be greatly surprised if there aren't people out there spreading crazy theories that are Feds. But at the same time, it's also like someone could just be, I don't know, an idiot and not understand their ways or mean well, or they. I mean, sometimes we have this problem too, with where something will come up, some source, some person will claim this thing, and then that source becomes the source for another source, and then it just becomes this compounding effect of like source within a source within a source, but then it's based on this original, faulty source that no one really rooted out from the beginning. So it is hard when you're dealing with these facts and stuff. So I do think you got to keep that in mind first. And there is a grifting, and like usually I use grifting like kind of like sarcastically because it's just been like denigrated to the point of meeting someone who promotes something that you don't like. Like that's basically what it functionally means at this point in time. So I think it's actually kind of a useless word. It's kind of in the realm of when you're politically using the word cuck or libtard or mag idiot or like it means nothing other than I don't like you. But when I say grifter, I mean whether consciously or subconsciously there becomes this effect where people notice some sort of boost. I feel like there is, when I say subconsciously, this probably happens sometimes with things like social media. I feel like this is a common thing, especially when people are constantly negative, like if they're always shitting on certain characters. And don't get me wrong, I've had my fair share of shitting on people on social media. But if that is like what you make your personality, I think people notice, like you'll see like a boost where you're like, oh, you're kind of getting a boost off this hate, and then you just kind of feed into that, and you're rational. You're like the subconscious behind your rational mind kind of sort of takes over, and you continue in that methodology. So when I say that, I literally mean it could be someone who has some sort of faulty theory that maybe is for some reason has gained some sort of interest with people, and maybe they feel some sort of emotional connection to it or whatever. And because of the boost, kind of like getting gassed up by people, they kind of just latch onto it and find ways, like essentially cognitive dissonance, to where they're willing to overlook certain negative aspects. Or it literally could be as simple as just like, well, I'm making money off this or whatever, or personal gain. I don't know. I think I will say on that aspect, I think that's something, if you are a content creator, I think going forward in the future, like unless you are a Fed that has some sort of Fed backing to be able to manipulate algorithms and stuff, I don't think that's a good long-term plan. If you're trying to be a content creator and trying to make a name for yourself, I feel like that's a good way to have maybe a small quick rise and then just like, like I think that I think the move is to be consistent and reliable, and people identify that over time, and you gain followings that way. It's kind of the libertarian concept of time preference. If you're like if you have the high time preference thing, would be the idea of like essentially you need your gratification quicker. It would be the stuff like not being logical, being unreliable, kind of jumping to this theory, that theory, or like kind of like the constantly just shitting on people, and that's kind of what you make your personality. And the obviously the low time preference would be the opposite. So yeah, I get a little bit of a rant there, but I think there's something good there at the root of it. All right, last one. This is from Zachary again. He says, definitely asked about the stand down orders Cheney gave prior to the plane hitting the building. I guess this is kind of a two-parter. Also, what does he think about Rumsfeld basically missing for hours, supposedly helping in the crash site? And I guess you can start with Cheney giving stand down orders, because I do remember that being a thing.
Yeah, this is actually up for debate, right? So Cheney was at the Presidential Emergency Operations Center located in the in the White House, and actually surrounded by top staff of the White House and government and the military, and basically was actually talking with somebody. And there was a naval aide who goes by the name of Douglas Cochran. Actually, a lot of people wanted to know who that was when he said the plane is 50 miles out, the plane's 40 miles out. And this actually is referring to Flight 77. And so what happened was Dulles, Indianapolis, I'm sorry, Ronald Reagan National Airport, which is right near the Pentagon, which is the center of the airlines in Washington, D.C., basically reported that there was a high-speed plane coming in very low, and usually right near the airport, planes have to come in on a very slow descent to land. But this plane actually was going very fast, and so there was a boss, Washington D.C. Controller Daniel O'Brien. She saw this blip on the screen. Now with the transponder turned off, the plane doesn't have the markings on the screen, but it has the blip. So this person was looking at this blip coming in at a high rate of speed. And she says that she thinks it's a military plane because only military planes go that fast. Why would this plane go that fast when it's landing? Well, not realizing this plane wasn't going to land, it was actually going to crash. And so when the plane was descending into Arlington City, there was another C-130 plane that actually saw the Flight 77, and they basically said, "Oh, this plane is going very fast. It's descending." This information reached the PIOC, and Dick Cheney's on the phone. And then naval aide Douglas Cochran comes in, "Sir, the plane's 50 miles out. Sir, the plane's 40 miles out." When it got to the plane's 10 miles out. Do the orders still stand? And Dick Cheney, according to his wife, Lynn Cheney, who wrote daily notes, it's on scribd.com. Dick Cheney quipped his neck around and said, "Of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary?" Now, what would that be? Would it be a shoot down order? Well, the vice president didn't have shoot down authority until 10:30 a.m. And the vice president is not part of the military chain of command. This is actually going to answer the second question quite fine, which I'm glad that guy asked it. And so basically, it's not a shoot down order. This is basically a stand down order. Well, I mean, why else would they would they not want to shoot down the plane? Well, because Dick Cheney hasn't given that authority. Now, I would happen to submit this answers to your second question. This is about military chain of command. Now, the military chain of command goes as follows. When it comes to shoot down authority, the president, the secretary of defense, NORAD, they make the decisions. If the president is somehow can't get in touch, or somehow the secretary of defense is not available, they practice this. Now, back in the late 1970s and 80s, during the Reagan administration, they would run these operations that involved the future Vice President Dick Cheney, who at the time was a staffer under the Reagan administration, and also Richard Clark, who's head of the National Security Counterterrorism Center under the Clinton and Bush administrations. And these were continuity of government operations in the hopes that under the Cold War, if one area of government is not functioning, that means another area of government's functioning. In other words, the president and vice president under a threat matrix, under a direct threat matrix, like a nuclear threat, are going to be separated so that the government can continue to govern the country. So in other words, the president's dead, the vice president is now the president. Well, the vice president is dead, now it's left up to Secretary of Defense or the Speaker of the House, whoever's living.
Yeah.
So they would have these bunkers and all these different areas of people living under these bunkers. So on 9/11, what happened? Well, the president was in Air Force One, and he couldn't directly talk to Cheney at times because the plane's phone was malfunctioning at times. In fact, he complained about it. Politico wrote a very good article about this, talking about how it's called the "We're the Only Plane in the Sky" is the name of the article. I think it's Political or ProPublica, one of those. But he basically was complaining about, I got to talk to the vice president. We got to talk. Well, what's going on? The Secretary of Defense. Well, he's second in command in the military chain of command. Where is he? Well, he's outside the Pentagon. He's not at. The nation's under attack. Why the hell is he outside? Helping out. Well, with no Secretary of Defense and with no president, shoot down authority goes to who? Well, it goes to NORAD. Who is NORAD talking on the phone with? The Vice President, Dick Cheney. So Dick Cheney is illegally breaking that command code because he's actually giving orders. Now, there's a fine line. Do we know what's talked about on the phones? We would, but the transcripts don't exist. In fact, afterwards, Lynn Cheney, I think the the National Security Advisor under the Bush administration, Condoleezza Rice, would complain that the transcripts and the phones basically weren't recorded. So who knows what they were talking about on those phones? And they're going to come out clean and say, yeah, we gave a stand down order. In other words, they wanted the plane to hit the Pentagon because with the planes hitting the World Trade Center, it wasn't an act of war. When the plane hit the Pentagon, it was an act of war because it hit the military nerve center. So was it a stand down order? I'll leave it up to you, right?
Yeah.
What is the most obvious in this? Right? The most obvious is the most evident. The only thing is that we can't prove it in a court of law because we don't have the direct evidence. And this is the reason why they classify stuff or they don't record stuff or the tapes go missing, like in Oklahoma City, right? So we have this consistent problem throughout history regarding main events. So I would submit to you, I think that was a stand down order because they didn't give a shoot down order until 10:36 a.m. And that's when all the planes had crashed that day. So,
I mean, you did, I guess, kind of, sort of touch on the second question.
what was it? Timing?
The second part of the question, I guess there was two questions within one. Said also, what does he think about Rumsfeld basically missing for hours, supposedly helping the crash site?
Yeah,
You
he's out.
kind of
He was,
tied that
yeah,
into. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, I'm sorry. He's actually
Yeah.
outside helping people. In fact, there's a couple of people who complained, "What the hell is he doing out here?" Because there was at the time of the crash. Now there was hundreds of people coming to the crashing. All Fort Myer, Fort Belvoir, Ronald Reagan International Airport had fire departments coming in. So all these first responders were arriving within minutes. So it made no sense for the Secretary of Defense to be outside at the nation of it under attack. Makes no sense at all why we'd be out there. Now, of course, his staff basically would come out to the New York Times and Chicago Tribune, basically report that, it's that's expected from Rumsfeld. He wants to help, considering he's a war criminal. Yeah, he
Yeah.
wants to help though.
This reminds me of the
Yeah.
there were in OKC because the whole, I mean, if anyone's been following my content, I'm not going to rehash it all. I don't feel the need to hold people's hand through it, but the ATF weren't there in the building. Like, I don't really need to give you the additional stuff to support that, but they weren't there that morning. And then later there also became this is one I haven't really put on any like big shows or much because it's like kind of in the weeds. This is pretty much just on my series, I think, so far. But like one other thing is, this is something Richard Booth brought up. They literally made up like fantasy stories of them. Like I think it was one particular story where there were some ATF agents in the building, and their story was that the elevator collapsed, like fell, like I can't remember how many floors, but it was like kind of like it was almost sounding like some dumb Rambo nonsense. And then in the story was, and then they basically broke through the doors and started helping people and stuff. And it's like, and then come to find out they talked to the elevator, make it like some elevator technicians are like, yeah, if they were in free fall that long, yeah, they'd probably be dead. Like, so I don't know if they misunderstood the physics of how like elevators work. Like, I don't know, they just think you're falling, but you're inside a thing. So, like maybe it'll hurt a little bit. Like, no, it's the same concept of falling from anything else. So if you were in a dead fall and stopped, it's the same idea. But yeah, no, it's just funny. I mean, I don't know. I guess, yeah, sure. Technically, maybe Rumsfeld could have been saving people, but it sounds a little fantastical. Like, I don't know.
Considering he's the author of the torture program, I happen to say no.
I mean, I don't know. There's a little bit different than like, because the idea is that he was at the Pentagon, right? And then he was helping
Yep.
people at the Pentagon. So, like, I don't know. Maybe let's be fair. Maybe he didn't know that, like, that it was like whether, like, say there was some lie hop, my hop thing. Maybe he wasn't in the know. Maybe no one cared to let him be in the know. Maybe that was like an acceptable casualty in their heads or whatever. Whether they knew he was there or not, I don't know. But
Well, it's deniability, right?
yeah. So, like, I don't know. If you're in the Pentagon, like, even the most evil people have friends. So, like, these are going to be people that he probably, like, in the building that he sees, probably sees
Sure.
sometimes. So I don't know. I'm sure he has some shred of humanity.
Well, I would no, I think this is a great point that you
Yeah.
raised, very well, and it also gives him an excuse not to be at the time of the attacks in order to make decisions that if you want to have a stand down order or shoot down order right away, you would have people at the military chain of command making those orders.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great episode, Adam. It's been a pleasure having you on. I will definitely have to do this again at some point, covering. I don't know. We can cover some other stuff. You had an interesting talk on your show recently, kind of going into how the powers that be kind of control the media and the narrative. And
Mm,
I mean, once again, it's another thing you commonly see. Like we even brought up earlier, how they infiltrate different areas, even just like media aside. Like, I mean, they've infiltrated the left. They've infiltrated celebrities. They've infiltrated the hippie movement. They infiltrate everything. So it's like, I mean, to some extent, it's like, the militia movement's a good example. They create these militias that end up being crazy and saying crazy stuff and having people, and then lo and behold, someone then writes a story about it, and then it carries forward, and now we have this. Now it completely changes the way people view militia or whatever. Like, it's just shaping the world we live in a weird way when you like take away this false reality they're kind of creating.
yeah,
So
no,
that
listen.
was a good one. Huh?
Yeah, I made that video on the club only because when I woke up this morning and went on Twitter, which is a nightmare, basically we're talking about the Trump indictments, and basically I saw it past couple of weeks and months. I've seen this fervent divide of politics online, and I just made that video off the top of my head today, and I wanted to make it clear that the people are being manipulated, psychologically manipulated from the legacy media, which is the national media, even media abroad, that are basically making sure that the people think they're the enemy and to another. We're not, and we're not very different from each other. And once we realize that, we become the threat to the people that want to make us the enemy unto ourselves. And I thank you so much for having me on your show. I love it. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure having you. Like I said, I've been meaning to for a while. I do appreciate your work. I mean, I think we probably have some minor differences about stuff. I know, like, you tend to some of like the Alex Jones stuff. I think we might have slightly different views on that. You're a little bit more malicious.
I'm a little bit
Uh,
more radical when it
I
comes.
I think I'm a little bit more willing to forgive to
Yeah.
some aspect.
Well,
But
you're a
there
human
are
being. I'm a dead soul.
but there are valid criticisms, and I get it. People point
Yeah.
out, like, hey, this specific story was super sloppy on. I mean, but at the same time, I can understand, like, with the role he filled, I guess kind of to some extent what I do. Like, it's hard to have if you're covering a wide array of topics, it is hard to be really good on things.
Right. Right.
So I, I don't know, and there's some, I don't know. I just feel like people are complex. So, and it's like boiling it down to simplistic things sometimes doesn't do us any favors. But we're not gonna go on a rant there. You have valid criticisms of Alex
Sure.
Jones. I'll give you that for sure. And some of the other people you point out. But yeah, it was a pleasure having you. I do want to remind people this was a patron curated episode. There's a $10 level. So if that's something you're interested in, I mean, when I say curated, what that means is roughly give me an idea of a topic, guess. It can be yourself. If you bring me a good enough one, and basically it kind of gives you like I mean, don't get me wrong, it has to be something I can actually do. So like I very well may be like no, but when someone's like 9/11, I mean, it's like, all right, cool. I've been looking for an excuse to talk to Adam, so like that works, it I don't know, it helps me too for like content, so I don't mind it if that's what you want to do. It helps out. But I appreciate your time. You want to go ahead and drop your plugs, let people know where they can find you?
Yeah, I'm pretty simple, just my name. If you actually Google Adam Fitzgerald 9/11, I come right up. But on Twitter, if you actually go to underscore Adam Fitzgerald, I have all the links into my pinned tweet of all the sites I post on, and you can always click on one of those links or whatever.
All right. Well, I appreciate you. This is the No Way Jose show for people who didn't catch it at the start. On YouTube, all the major audio podcasts, Odyssey as well. Follow me at Terragang Jose on Twitter if you'd like to do that. If you want to support me, patreon.com/NoWayJose2020. Like, share, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. Don't really have any big shows to plug or anything, but it's a pleasure. I want to say thank you to the audience out there. It was really cool seeing the reception from the part of the prom episode. I hope a lot of people got something out of that. I've seen a big jump in my OKC stuff. I don't know, just keep sharing around OKC stuff. It doesn't even have to be mine. I just think it's really cool what's happening in that specific realm right now, and I want to keep that energy going. But thanks again, Adam. This is a lot of fun.
And
If
you.
you have any final words, you can drop them. Otherwise, we're out of here.
Tower Gang Power.
Yeah, hell yeah. All right, we're out of here. Oh, crap! I right clicked. Oh no, I was clicking on the wrong thing there.